Hello. Welcome to the Daily Faded. This is where we get faded and we talk about the politics and the news of the day. Been wanting to do something like this for a few nights now. So I'm going to say their names. And this is just a few out of how many tens of thousands over decades and centuries. This is from the Star Tribune in Minneapolis. Brianna Taylor's death seems lost in nationwide protests. None of the officers in her death have been arrested or fired, though the FBI is investigating. Last week, Andrea Ritchie, a researcher at Barnard Center for Research on Women, joined thousands of others across the U.S. to take part in a protest demanding justice for George Floyd. She proudly chanted his name outside the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. But I was shocked that I didn't hear anyone say Brianna Taylor's name at any point, Ritchie said, referring to the black emergency medical technician in Louisville who was killed by police in March, just weeks before Floyd's death. Officers burst into Taylor's apartment while she was asleep during a late-night drug investigation using a so-called no-knock warrant. Her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, who has said he was worried someone was breaking into the apartment, shot and wounded an officer. The officers have said that they then returned fire and shot Taylor at least 8 times in her own home. Her mother filed a lawsuit against the Louisville Police Department in late April, and people in Louisville started taking to the streets demanding justice in May. None of the officers in her case have been arrested or fired, though the FBI is investigating. All Black Lives Matter, Ritchie said, adding that this movement should be striving to address police brutality against Black men and women and LGBTQ people. Slight comment. No-knock warrants. When there's no indication that someone is under threat of harm or death, I'm not really sure we need no-knock warrants. I don't care for Roger Stone. So I have schadenfreude when bad things happen to him. But I don't think the way they did the no-knock warrant to him was cool. I don't think that doesn't mean you can't break down the door if, you have a warrant and they won't let you in. I mean, but from what I've seen in LA, there's a lot on the streets about George Floyd, but not a lot about Brianna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery for that matter. Back to the story. We're not trying to compete with Floyd's story. We're trying to complete the story, said Ritchie, who is also the author of Invisible No More, Police Violence Against Black Women and Women of Color. Things started to shift on what would have been Taylor's 27th birthday yesterday. Protesters marched in her honor. Still, Taylor's case remains largely disconnected with the broader national conversation that's happening around George Floyd's death. No celebrities have offered to pay for her funeral or taken out full-page newspaper ads dedicated to her. Perhaps it's because there was no graphic video footage or because it all happened back in March at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. But her exclusion and that of other Black women is the latest iteration of a long-standing issue. Black women's experiences of police brutality and their tireless contributions to mass social justice movements have almost always received far less media or political attention. For years, Black women have faced a double bind of racial and sex discrimination. Brianna Taylor was an EMT who worked at 2 local hospitals in Louisville, Kentucky, including amid the coronavirus pandemic. She was a daughter, a granddaughter, a sister, a niece, and a best friend. Brianna Taylor was full of life and loved social gathering with her friends, and especially her family. Her obituary reads, "She loved life and all it had to offer." George Floyd, a resident of St. Louis Park, Minnesota, St. Louis Park, I don't know, died Monday, May 25th, 2020, at the age of 46. While in the custody of Minneapolis police officers, he was murdered, which sparked nationwide protests against police brutality. He was born in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and grew up in Houston, Texas. At the time of his death, he worked as a security guard at Conga Latin Bistro. Floyd's uncle, Selwyn Jones, told the Rapid City Journal that Floyd is survived by 3 children and that the 6'7" gentle giant had been a star football and basketball player in high school. He was everyone's favorite everything, his cousin Tara Brown told TMX News. Floyd was a longtime friend of NBA champion basketball player and ESPN analyst Stephen Jackson. "Floyd was my brother. We called each other twin," Jackson said in an Instagram post on May 26th. In another, Jackson said, "If he needed me, I was there for him. I think he was closer to me than some of my own family." Floyd's partner, Courtney Ross, told KARE 11 News in Minneapolis, "He was not only the man I loved, but the man I admired. He taught me how to be a better person." His childhood friend, Christopher Harris, told NPR, "If he had a stamp and it had his signature on it, it would be his smile. It literally lit up a room." "I want people to know that George Floyd was a caring person," his Yates High School football and basketball teammate Jonathan Veal told KWTX News 10 in Texas. "His personality and his heart for others was equal or greater to his physical stature, and he always had a heart to give back." Floyd is also being mourned by friends from Houston's hip-hop scene. "He believed in people," rapper Trey the Truth told Rolling Stone. To a point, it seemed he believed in people more than he even believed in himself. "Everybody loved Floyd," his employer Giovanni Thungstrom of Conga Latin Bistro told KARE 11. "We all have good memories of him." If for some reason you're new to this live stream, I mean no disrespect by smoking cannabis in the middle of it. Here's a recent one. Shaun Monterossa, again, this is just a snapshot, really, of a few people, a few stories, a few names. Shaun Monterossa, a 22-year-old San Francisco resident, was shot and killed by an officer in Vallejo, California. The officer thought Monterossa had a gun in his pocket, but instead it was a hammer, Police Chief Shawnee Williams said Wednesday, CBS San Francisco reports. Police arrived at a Walgreens in Vallejo as it was being looted on Tuesday, Williams said. Officers chased 2 vehicles as they fled, and one rammed a police car and injured an officer. Officers saw Monterossa approach the car. This individual appeared to be running toward the black sedan, but suddenly stopped, taking a kneeling position and placing his hands above his waist, revealing what appeared to be the butt of a handgun. Investigations later revealed that the weapon was a long 15-inch hammer tucked into the pocket of his sweatshirt due to this perceived threat. One officer fired his weapon 5 times from within the police vehicle, through the windshield, striking the suspect once, fatally wounding the suspect. So that was just in the recent day's events this past Wednesday. Sandra Bland was a 28-year-old African-American woman who was found hanged in a jail cell in Waller County, Texas, on July 13th, 2015, 3 days after being arrested during a pretextual traffic stop. Her death was ruled a suicide. It was followed by protests against her arrest, disputing the cause of death and alleging racial violence against her. Bland was pulled over for a minor traffic violation on July 10th by State Trooper Brian Enciniya. The exchange escalated, resulting in Bland's arrest and charge for assaulting a police officer. The arrest was partially recorded by Enciniya's dash cam, a bystander's cell phone, and Bland's own cell phone. After authorities reviewed the dash cam footage, Enciniya was placed on administrative leave for failing to follow proper traffic stop procedures. Texas authorities and the FBI conducted an investigation into Bland's death and determined the Waller County Jail did not follow required policies, including time checks on inmates and ensuring that employees had completed required mental health training. In December 2015, a grand jury declined to indict the county sheriff and jail staff for a felony relating to Bland's death. The following month, Enciniya was indicted for perjury for making false statements about the circumstances surrounding Bland's arrest, and he was subsequently fired by the Texas Department of Public Safety. The Department of Public Safety. In September 2016, Bland's mother settled a wrongful death lawsuit against the county jail and police department for $1.9 million and some procedural changes. In June 2017, the perjury charge against Enciniya was dropped in return for his agreement to permanently end his law enforcement career. That video is haunting. She's absolutely correct that she's being profiled. She knows it. Trayvon Benjamin Martin was a 17-year-old African-American from Miami Gardens, Florida, who was fatally murdered in Sanford, Florida, by George Zimmerman. Martin had gone with his father on a visit to his father's fiancée at her townhouse at the Retreat at Twin Lakes in Sanford. On the evening of February 26th, Martin was walking back alone to the fiancée's house from a nearby convenience store. Zimmerman, a member of the community watch, saw Martin and reported him to the Sanford police as suspicious. Several minutes later, there was an altercation and Zimmerman fatally shot Martin in the chest. Zimmerman was injured during the encounter and claimed he had been defending himself. He was not charged at the time. The police said there was no evidence to refute his claim of self-defense and that Florida's stand your ground law prohibited them from arresting or charging him. After national media focused on the incident, Zimmerman was eventually charged and tried, but the jury acquitted him of second-degree murder and manslaughter in July 2013. Trayvon Martin was born in Miami, Florida, and attended both Norland Middle School and Highland Oaks Middle School in North Miami-Dade County, Florida. He attended Miami Carroll City High School in Miami Gardens for his freshman and sophomore years. At the time of the shooting, Martin was a junior at Dr. Michael M. Kropp High School in North Miami-Dade. Tamir Rice. On November 22nd, 2014, Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old African-American boy, was killed in Cleveland, Ohio, by Timothy Lohman, a 26-year-old police officer. Rice was carrying a replica toy airsoft gun. Lohman shot him almost immediately after arriving on the scene. I believe it was less than 2 seconds. Two officers, Lohman and 46-year-old Frank Garmbach, were responding to a police dispatch call regarding a male who, quote, keeps pulling a gun out of his pants and pointing it at people. A caller reported that a male was pointing a pistol at random people in the Cadell Recreation Center, a park in the center of Cleveland's Public Works Department. At the beginning of the call, and again in the middle, he says of the pistol, it's probably fake. Toward the end of the 2-minute call, The caller states that he is probably a juvenile. However, this information was not relayed to the officers. The officers reported that upon their arrival, they both continuously yelled, "Show me your hands," through the open patrol car window. Lohman further claimed that instead of showing his hands, it appeared as if Rice was trying to draw. "I knew it was a gun, and I knew it was coming out." In response, the officer shot twice, hitting Rice once in the torso. He died the following day. Rice's gun was later found to be an airsoft replica that lacked the orange-tipped barrel, which would have indicated it was a non-lethal gun. Would that have mattered? Would that have mattered if it had an orange tip? Would they have seen that? Or would they simply have seen what they thought was a black man with a gun? A lawsuit brought against the city of Cleveland by Tamir Rice's family was subsequently settled for $6 million. In the aftermath of the shooting, it was revealed that Lohman, in his previous job as a police officer in the Cleveland suburb of Independence, had been deemed an emotionally unstable recruit and unfit for duty. How many times do we hear this story about the cop? How many complaints did the cop who killed George Floyd have against him? 17 complaints? Something ridiculous? On August 9th, 2014, Michael Brown Jr., an 18-year-old black man, was fatally shot by 28-year-old white Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson in the city of Ferguson, Missouri, a suburb of St. Louis. Brown was accompanied by his 22-year-old friend Dorian Johnson. Wilson said that an altercation ensued when Brown attacked Wilson in his police vehicle for control of Wilson's gun until it was fired. Johnson stated that Wilson initiated a confrontation by grabbing Brown by the neck through his car window, threatening him, and then shooting at him. At this point, both Wilson and Johnson state that Brown and Johnson fled, with Wilson pursuing Brown shortly thereafter. Wilson stated that Brown stopped and charged him after a short pursuit. Johnson contradicted this account, stating that Brown turned around with his hands raised after Wilson shot at his back. According to Johnson, Wilson then shot Brown multiple times until Brown fell to the ground. In the entire altercation, Wilson fired a total of 12 bullets, including twice during the struggle in the car. The last was probably the fatal shot. Brown was hit 6 times, all from the front. Why would he turn around and charge a man with a gun? A grand jury was called and given extensive evidence from Robert McCulloch, the St. Louis County prosecutor. On November 24th, 2014, McCulloch announced the St. Louis County grand jury had decided not to indict Wilson. On March 4th, 2015, the U.S. Department of Justice reported the conclusion of its own investigation and cleared Wilson of civil rights violations in the shooting. It found forensic evidence supported the officer's account, that witnesses who corroborated the officer's account were credible, and that witnesses who had incriminated him were not credible. Of course. How convenient. The U.S. Department of Justice concluded that Wilson shot Brown in self-defense. Again, I mean no disrespect by smoking while going through these stories. The murder of Laquan Mcdonald took place on October 20th, 2014, in Chicago, Illinois, when the 17-year-old African-American was fatally shot by Chicago police officer Jason Van Dyke. Police had initially reported that McDonald was behaving erratically while walking down the street, refused to put down a knife he was carrying, and lunged at them. Preliminary internal police reports described the incident similarly and ruled the shooting justified, and Van Dyke was not charged in his shooting at that time. When a court ordered the police to release a dashcam video of the shooting 13 months later, on November 24th, 2015, it showed Mcdonald had been walking away from the police when he was shot. The same day, Officer Van Dyke was charged with first-degree murder and initially held without bail at the Cook County Jail. He was released on bail on November 30th. The city reached a settlement with McDonald's family. On October 5th, 2018, Van Dyke was found guilty of second-degree murder, as well as 16 counts of aggravated battery with a firearm. At the request of Illinois Attorney General Lisa Madigan, the U.S. DOJ initiated a civil rights investigation into McDonald's death and the activities of the Chicago Police Department. It released its report in January 2017, describing the police as having a culture of excessive violence, especially against minority suspects, and of having poor training and supervision. DOJ and city officials signed a consent decree for a plan for improvement to be overseen by the courts. 3 Chicago police officers tried for allegedly attempting to cover up events related to the shooting were found not guilty by Cook County Circuit Court on January 17, 2019. On July 6, 2016, Philando Castile, a 32-year-old African-American man, was stopped while driving and fatally shot by Geronimo Yanez, a 28-year-old Hispanic-American police officer from St. Anthony, Minnesota. Castile was driving with his partner Diamond Reynolds and her 4-year-old daughter when at 9 p.m. their vehicle was pulled over by Yanez and another officer in Falcon Heights, a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota. After being asked for his license and registration, Castile told Officer Yanez that he had a firearm Castile was licensed to carry, to which Yanez replied, "Don't reach for it then." And Castile said, I was reaching for. Yanez said, "Don't pull it out." Castile replied, "I'm not pulling it out." And Reynolds said, "He's not." Yanez repeated, "Don't pull it out," and then shot at Castile at close range 7 times, hitting him 5 times. Castile died at 9:37 p.m. at Hennepin County Medical Center, about 20 minutes after being shot. Reynolds posted a live stream video on Facebook in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, which prompted the incident to achieve national notoriety. There were local and national protests, and 5 months after the incident, Yanez was charged with second-degree manslaughter and 2 counts of dangerous discharge of a firearm. After 5 days of deliberation, he was acquitted on all charges. On June 16, 2017, in a jury trial, and was immediately fired by the city of St. Anthony. Wrongful death lawsuits against the city brought by Reynolds and Castile's family were settled for $3.8 million. I will never forget that Facebook Live video. It's one of the most horrifying things I've ever seen. You know, I always feel like I have to commit these names to memory. And, well, I smoke a lot of weed and I don't have a very good memory. So it's, what's the right word? It's, well, I guess, I'm sorry for that long pause. I guess it's simply that it's important to remember their names. And I did remember most of these names as I was looking them up and making sure I got all of the details as accurate as the internet has to offer. But a few of them I couldn't remember their names, and I couldn't remember Sandra Bland's name. I can't believe I couldn't remember her name. In the late evening, hold on. In the late evening of March 18th, 2018, Stephan Clark, a 22-year-old African-American man, was shot and killed in Meadowview, Sacramento, California, by Terrence Mercadal and Jared Robinette, two officers of the Sacramento Police Department, in the backyard of his grandmother's house while he had a phone in his hand. The encounter was filmed by police video cameras and by a Sacramento County Sheriff's Department helicopter, which was involved in observing Clark on the ground and in directing ground officers to the point at which the shooting took place. The officers stated that they shot Clark, firing 20 rounds, believing that he had pointed a gun at them. Police found only a cell phone on him. While the Sacramento County Coroner's autopsy report concluded that Clark was shot 7 times, including 3 shots to the right side of the back, the pathologist hired by the Clark family stated that Clark was shot 8 times, including 6 times in the back. The shooting caused large protests in Sacramento, and Clark's family members have rejected the initial police description of the events leading to Clark's death. The Sacramento Police Department placed the officers on paid administrative leave and opened a use of force investigation. Police have stated they are confident that Clark was the suspect responsible for breaking windows in the area prior to the encounter. On March 2nd, 2019, the Sacramento County District Attorney announced that the Sacramento police officers who killed Clark would not be charged and that they had probable cause to stop Clark and were legally justified in the use of deadly force. And Javier Becerra did nothing. Our Attorney General, he did nothing. It's so clear from the footage of Stephan Clark. It's so clear what happened. Shame on Javier Becerra. We're almost done here. Botham Jean was murdered on September 6th, 2018. Off-duty Dallas Police Department Patrol Officer Amber Geiger entered the Dallas, Texas apartment of 26-year-old accountant Botham Jean and fatally shot him. Geiger said that she had entered the apartment believing it was her own and that she shot Jean believing he was a burglar. The fact that Geiger, a white police officer, shot and killed Jean, an unarmed black man, and was initially only charged with manslaughter, resulted in protests and accusations of racial bias. On October 1st, 2019, Geiger was found guilty of murder. The next day, she received a sentence of 10 years in prison. Geiger's apartment was on the 3rd floor, directly below Jean's apartment on the 4th, in an apartment building with mostly identical floor plans on each level. Geiger testified that she thought the apartment was her own and that she found the door slightly ajar, and she testified that she thought Jean was an intruder in the darkening living room of her apartment, when in fact Jean was killed in his own apartment. She claimed she feared Jean would kill her. Botham Jean was unarmed. After Geiger shot Botham Jean, she called 911. Jean was taken to a nearby hospital where he died from his wound. The Texas Rangers investigated the shooting, which led to Geiger's arrest 3 days later. Geiger was initially charged with manslaughter, but was later charged with murder. Botham Shem Jean, a 26-year-old black man, was a Harding University alumnus and an accountant for PricewaterhouseCoopers. Jean was born in St. Lucia. On July 17th, 2014, Eric Garner died in the New York City borough of Staten Island after Daniel Pantaleo, a New York City Police Department officer, put him in a chokehold while arresting him. Video footage of the incident generated widespread national attention and raised questions about the appropriate use of force by law enforcement. NYPD officers approached Garner on July 17th on suspicion of selling single cigarettes from packs without tax stamps. After Garner told the police that he was tired of being harassed and that he was not selling cigarettes, the officers attempted to arrest Garner. When Pantaleo placed his hands on Garner, Garner refused to cooperate and pulled his arms away. Pantaleo then placed his arm around Garner's neck and wrestled him to the ground. With multiple officers restraining him, Garner repeated the words, "I can't breathe," 11 times while lying face down on the sidewalk. We've come full circle in the 6 years since Eric Garner. After Garner lost consciousness, officers turned him onto his side to ease his breathing. Garner remained lying on the sidewalk for 7 minutes while the officers waited for an ambulance to arrive. Garner was pronounced dead at an area hospital approximately 1 hour later. On December 4th, 2014, a Richmond County grand jury decided not to indict Pantaleo. This decision stirred public protests and rallies, with charges of police brutality made by protesters. I mean, if you've seen the Eric Garner video, how can it be described as anything other than police brutality? It is the definition of police brutality. By December 28, 2014, at least 50 demonstrations had been held nationwide in response to the Garner case, while hundreds of demonstrations against general police brutality counted Garner as a focal point. On July 13, 2015, an out-of-court settlement was announced in which the city of New York would pay the Garner family $5.9 million. Again, Garner was the textbook case of police brutality. In 2019, the U.S. Department of Justice declined to bring criminal charges against Pantaleo under federal civil rights laws. A New York Police Department disciplinary hearing regarding Pantaleo's treatment of Garner was held in the summer of 2019. On August 2, 2019, an administrative judge recommended that Pantaleo's employment be terminated. Pantaleo was fired on August 19, 2019, more than 5 years after Eric Garner's death. This is only a few. This is a smattering. This is a handful. I mean, if you go back to 1619, how many people killed? How many people brutalized? How many people enslaved? We're still in the coronavirus pandemic. We're almost at 7 million cases, confirmed cases worldwide, and have just passed 400,000 deaths worldwide. We're at 1.9 million cases in the United States, so we're going to hit that 2 million number real soon. And we're up over at 112,096 deaths. California, we have 128,947 cases and 4,624 deaths. The United States makes up 5% of the world's population and 30% of the world's COVID-19 deaths. I'm sorry this wasn't a more cheerful live stream tonight. Thank you for tuning in. Peace out. Make sure you hit the like button, and I'll see you on Monday night.